Okay, very excited to be joined here by Matt Shuckerow and Joelle Hall. We're going to be talking about the three statewide races, actually three primaries and the special general. And it's coming up here. The August 16th primary is about 3 weeks away. So I'm very excited to be joined here by Matt Shuckerow, the owner, Fathom Strategic Communications.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
Governor Dunleavy's former press secretary. You ran Senator Sullivan's 2020 campaign.
Yep. I had the honor of working back east for about 10 years in the Alaska delegation and was helping Congressman Young on his reelection before he passed. And so been around, done a lot of work, and happy to be here.
And Joelle Hall, president of the Alaska AFL-CIO, longtime Politico, very familiar with campaigns and politics here in Alaska.
Yep. Nice to be here, Jeff.
Very happy you could make it.
Thank you.
First time on the this kind of show, but you've been on before. So.
Oh yeah. We've done a few podcasts together, but I don't think we've ever been on the recording side.
It's always fun. Well, there's three primaries coming up in August, and the only legislative race with more than 4 people is the Adam Wool race in Fairbanks, so none of those races really matter that much. But the statewide races, the governor, U.S. Senate, U.S. House, all have way more than 4 people. So I want to start by talking about the governor's race, which has 10 candidates, but 3 kind of major candidates, the incumbent Dunleavy with Dahlstrom, Walker and Heidi Dreiges, former governor, and then Bill Lesker and Jessica Cook are kind of the main players. Yeah. But then there's an interesting situation with 2 Republican tickets, Christopher Kirk, Paul Huper, and Charlie Pierce, Edie Grunwald. So I want to start with you, Matt, about kind of your ideas of who might be going to the 4th place here on the primary to the general.
Yeah, I think anecdotally it feels like that it's Charlie Pierce's kind of 4th spot to lose. I think that in his lieutenant governor candidate, Edie Grunwald, who actually performed fairly well when she ran for lieutenant governor in 2018, who has a strong name and outreach in the valley. So, based on that and some of the polling that I have anecdotally seen, Pierce seems to be that 4th position candidate. Now, I don't think that it's going to be a significant number of votes, as you kind of outlined offline, and I'd love for you to share that, is that it's not going to be that many. The 4th place position may not actually need that many votes with the majority of the share. I think you said 90%.
I mean, I think probably Walker, Dunleavy, and Guerra consume 90% of the vote.
Yeah. And
then you have 10% left. What do you think, Joelle, with these? Because Kirk has that pro-life crowd, which a lot of people, that's their main issue. But then Pierce has the Peninsula crowd. He's the mayor down there.
Right. I agree. I think they're going to share a small percentage of the vote. It might be bigger than it normally would be when you were forced to make binary choices or very narrow choices, where they would have been a third-party candidate. It would attract less attention. So I would assume we're in the 10% range. But you just never know how people are going to decide to respond to this ranked choice environment. If it's 15, do they continue to ballot down the next? Do they continue to ballot down? I think that's the bigger question about what happens with these 4th place candidates, in particular, the ones that are hard over on certain issues and particularly concerned in certain issues. Do they, I've heard there's a expression going around, I think it's like vote red all the way down, like for the GOP's trying to get you to ballot all the way down, GOP all the way down. Well, the question is, do people do that? Because if they don't do that, then
the term they've been using is rank the red.
Rank the red.
Rank the red.
Rank the red, huh?
You can bubble the blue, I guess.
They got to vote the blue or bubble the blue. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. But it'll be interesting. That's for the next race. That's this. And that will apply for this special election here, the congressional special on August 16th. And the question is, do they, and as we've always said, is that the studies on this have said, if there's someone that is generally aligned with your philosophies, maybe it's not the same, but generally aligned, you're willing to vote that second vote. But if there's no one else that looks like anything you like on the ballot, then people do tend to, bullet vote, just check one person. So we'll have to see what happens.
Well, I feel like Pierce is a little more mainstream. And if he were to go on, I think his people would probably vote Dunleavy second, whereas Kirka has been extremely critical of Dunleavy in the legislature, on the campaign trail. So if he were to make it, I think his people are not going to be, and that could have an impact, because I think whoever it is, Kirka or Pierce, who goes to the general, they're going to drop off first.
I think you are correct in saying that, Kirka's campaign is a little bit different. It's a different group of people, and Pierce and Dunleavy aren't that. I don't think Pierce has done a great job defining himself as very different from Dunleavy, and his supporters aren't that different. His support of, he also got support of the Republican Party. Kirka does stand apart in a different way. He kind of stands for some very other different issues.
I mean, he's having fundraisers where they're smashing Dominion machines. I mean, they aren't really Dominion machines, but they're like old printers with it says Dominion with like a piece of paper. Have you seen that?
No. Gee, I'm sorry I missed it.
You could do a donation and you can take a bat and smash a Dominion machine. Kind of like Office Space, when they take the printer out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Throwing it off the building, is that right? Yeah.
So Joelle, all the candidates have raised over $1 million. I think Walker's up front with 1.5. Dunleavy's a little close behind, and then Guerra's there. And then obviously Dunleavy, there's this big $3 million RGA PAC that's going to be out there. But they're all essentially guaranteed to move on.
I would absolutely assume so.
You've run a lot of campaigns, and it's no longer like a party primary. Are they saving that money to the general, and then they just start pouring it? Because there's really not a big need to spend a lot of money right now, right?
There isn't a big need to spend money. I think there's probably a little bit more energy in the Walker and Guerra campaigns to perform well on August 16th.
Because you don't want to have a bad showing.
Right.
On the primary, too, at the same time.
I mean, they're in the unenviable position of trying to knock each other up or down for number the two. I presume Dunleavy will get in the 90%, he'll get the bigger share of the 90%. I don't think he's going to get 50%, but I do think in that last bubble, when they were bubbling one only on August 16th, that tension of trying to make sure you're not number 3 there is that tension for those two campaigns. So there'll probably be a little bit of energy, a little bit of a spend, but I think they know they have to save their money. It's going to get more expensive and more busy, and Dunleavy can kind of lay in wait with his $1 million and then $3 million, and then however much manages to show up in independent expenditure, because that's just on the campaign side, right?
Yeah,
there's a whole other trough of money that could flow in at any point.
And this was, there was always a discussion of how long do candidates and campaigns wait to spend their money? Do they exhaust resources in lead up to a primary? That really doesn't matter for a lot of these candidates. And I would say anecdotally, you're kind of seeing some campaigns say, well, shoot, I don't want to finish last. I don't want to have a poor showing. I'm going to spend some dollars. I personally don't think people are really thinking about an election happening on August 16th.
I think they're probably aware, because I'm seeing so much U.S. Senate stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute, but a lot of Lisa ads, Kelly Jabak on TV.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of U.S. Senate stuff, but not really as much governor.
Well, so you're just now seeing that. I know a number of campaigns have just gone up with buys. I know Governor Walker did a buy in July. There's been some radio spend, and that is kind of, I think, that idea that they want to perform well in August. But it feels like it's a little later than normal, and you're seeing a little bit.
I think running this landmine business, we sell ads, and it's been up until recently a bit slow. And somebody made a good point with this new system. The primary really isn't a factor for a lot of these, almost all legislative races, and even for the big races with the governor, the Senate, the House. Yeah. They're still kind of the main candidate. So if this was an old situation with a party primary, it's very competitive for a lot of them. Now we don't have that anymore. So it's maybe a little bit less pressure when there's not a party primary, now that we have this open primary.
Yeah. In the governor's race, I'll make this observation. I would assume that to the extent that any political leader gets 100% name ID, you have to assume that Governor Walker and Governor Dunleavy have approached whatever that threshold is, right? Near universal name ID.
Yeah.
I think that's the one place where Les doesn't have that advantage, really. I mean, he doesn't really have the name ID. So he probably still has to spend to do a little work to do.
It's pretty amazing. You guys have looked at polling a lot, and you guys know this, but I think a lot of people think if they know somebody, everybody knows them. There's only about 5 or 10 people in the state who have that kind of that peak name ID. Dunleavy, Murkowski, Walker, Sarah Palin, obviously. But there's so many people even in the legislature that the people in the political bubble think, oh, everybody knows them. And
Yeah.
really, it's like maybe 10% of the
yeah.
population knows who they are.
I think Matt and I are well
Yeah.
aware of
Well,
this phenomenon.
It's funny how they ask that question on most polls. It's like it's do not know or no opinion, and so sometimes it's that's interesting too, because you may see some candidates who have 80% recognition, but some of those maybe they know their name, but they just don't have opinion, so they're lukewarm. But there are people that have the universal name rec, and everyone has an opinion on, and those are actually very interesting to see.
So depending on how the primary goes, let's say if Walker outperforms Guerra by a lot, do you think there's going to be, because I mean Guerra and Walker are essentially sharing voters. They overlap a lot of voters, and Dunleavy has that Republican base. Do you think there's going to be any kind of like the old ways when you try to get people out of the race, and if somebody drops out, obviously the fifth place person will go up, but if Guerra has let's say a bad showing, do you think there'll be any pressure to get him to drop out of the race, or do you think he's all in for it?
I think there's less energy behind those types of tactics now that there's a rank at the other end. If this was a binary choice, you could only pick one candidate, and your votes didn't recycle up. I think there'd be a lot of pressure on these candidates to kind of coalesce behind. But I think in the ranked choice environment, that kind of pressure is way less likely, because there's, in the scenario you depict, if Dunleavy's way ahead and Guerra's, then the question is about who's getting Guerra's second place votes, and then that becomes the conversation. That becomes part of a campaign tactic. And regardless of the order, right, it's a campaign tactic for the second place votes.
To me, you raise an interesting question, because it feels like there is this loophole into where you can game the system to eventually drop off the ballot and no one does get moved up. I'm not saying that happens, but...
Well, that only happened in this special
But
situation.
he's pointing out it could happen again.
It couldn't. No, because the
Is
withdrawal
the count-
deadline corresponds with the 66 days or whatever.
Okay.
So that was a kind of an anomaly where they lined up the dates.
Okay, well that's good to know.
Yeah, with the regular election, if somebody withdraws by the withdrawal deadline, which I think is September 5th, in this case the fifth place person would go up.
Okay, well there you go. So but I don't think that necessarily that would happen. I think that there is a lot of debate on who, is there enough from the center left and to the far left to amass 50%? Because at the end of the day, there is some calculation with drop off and what happens. I mean, that's what everyone's trying to internally calculate now. And is Walker needing to push himself to the middle more? And some people have said having a candidate to your left or right flank actually gives you more freedom to operate in the middle. People have strategized about, do you see Bill Walker having to talk about some of the more progressive issues? There's a strategy to say, hey, no, we're going to let the left flank...
They've kind of touched on he's kind of personally pro-life, but the campaign's going to,
Respect the Constitution.
Respect Roe v. Wade, or what was Roe v. Wade, and our Constitution with privacy. So I think he's trying to thread the needle. You guys endorsed just Walker at campaign, right, AFL?
The AFL did, yes, just Walker Dragas.
So going back to the Walker and the Garrett, I mean, there's obviously competing for labor support, and they're competing for progressive support. If Dunleavy, he's going to get the first most votes in the first round in the regular election. If whoever the fourth place person is doesn't get him enough votes to go over the top, then I think it's going to be very hard for him to win.
Yeah, I think that's the issue that you talk about. If the take of the fourth place person is small enough or big enough, as it were, if they have a lot of incomplete voting, which I think is something everybody's kind of worried about. That what is the ratio? What is the amount of incomplete voting?
Some of these areas where they've done this, I mean, there's sometimes up to 50% drop off. They pick one person or two, that's it, and then the ballot kind of goes away after.
Well, arguably the person who is the most worried about incomplete voting is Governor Dunleavy.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean that it should be a real concern of his. So the question is, it's a simple thing of if it's Pierce and he pulls 10% and 7% of it counts, Dunleavy better make sure he has 45% in the first take. That's a lot out of 90%, right?
Yeah.
So this is a big it's a big circle he's trying to navigate. He's got to get a big
Well,
percentage.
you already see this with, this not answering some of the questions on some of these candidate questionnaires. Walker and Garrett did like a joint statement, which is already kind of showing there might be a pressure or a combined kind of effort to not go after each other, but go after Dunleavy. I don't know what that does for the voters who might look at these numbers and these ovals and when they vote.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people had talked about in lead up to the implementation of ballot measure 2 that in other states candidates had partnered together, had even stood on rally stages together and said, you can vote for me 1 and him 2 or vice versa. So I think we anticipated something of this happening, particularly folks who've worked in this space. But I think when you see it in on the street, when you see it at campaign rallies, people are going to be like, this is so weird.
It's so strange.
It's the
so
first
unfamiliar.
time. I mean, maybe if this is a lasting system, maybe eventually people will get used to it. But for right now, it just feels odd. And I think people are going to have to, they're just going to have to a little bit go with their gut. And I think a lot of people are looking for, they know that this is a system that involves some strategy, and they're looking for people saying, what is the strategy? And I think a lot of people are kind of hands up and saying, I don't really know. It just depends.
Well, I would make the observation that when the Unity ticket came together, it was a wildly popular
This is
thing.
the Walker-Malott.
The
back in
Walker-Malott
2014,
ticket.
yeah.
So this notion of people working across the aisle, there are certain elements in our electorate that don't like that. But I think if you take ballot measure 2 as a referendum about how people feel about that, the regular people, their response to the Unity ticket, I actually think more people like people getting along than our polarized edges would indicate. So.
Sure.
Well, let's move on to the U.S. Senate race. So this is another race with a lot more people than the governor's race. We'll pull up the screen here. There's 19 people running, but it's a similar situation where we have Murkowski, Chewbacca, and I would say Chesbro, Democrat. Now Murkowski's raised over $8 million. Chewbacca's at about $3 million. Murkowski has much more money on hand. Chesbro came in late, hasn't raised that much money, but really she's the Democrat kind of. There's some more in the race, but she's the one they're getting behind. So similar situation. I'll start with you, Matt. Who's going to be the fourth person in this race? And just like the governor's race, how's that going to impact the ranking in the general?
Yeah,
A lot of people, never heard of, but there's,
I will say, in looking at the reports, I was very surprised by how little money Chesbro raised.
it was like 38,
Yeah, like
$40,000.
$40,000.
A lot of legislative candidates raised more.
And
than
I
her.
think that maybe it was the fact that they felt like they donated to LV Gray Jackson when she was in that space, and they were like, I'm not ponying up any more money in this race. So that was very interesting. With that little money, you have very few resources to even run any sort of operation. You can't do mail. You can hardly have a staff. You can't do ground. You can't do calls. I mean, you can hardly keep the lights on if you even. There's probably not even a facility. So you can't do signs. So it's very fascinating to see at what great length this person will go and get votes. In terms of the fourth person, I think that. In terms of name rec, I think Edgar Blatchford kind of has some of that. He was the mayor of Seward. He was a professor. He's run for office before.
Another Democrat.
Another Democrat. He ran against Al Gross in 2020 for the Democrat nomination.
I kind of feel like that Libertarian Sean Thorne. I mean, the Libertarians, they're a small group, but they're kind of pretty hardcore.
Yeah, and that's the other person.
You
I
guys
think
are writing off Dustin Darden. I think it's a mistake.
He's in there too.
I
Dustin
know.
and
I'm
his
just
brother
saying.
David Darden
Yeah.
are both in there. And then you have a couple other kind of weird.
So the question is, are these
They're both in there. Yeah.
I know.
if you're
If he gets to the fourth, oh my God, just God.
Do they put
Could
him
you
in
imagine?
debates?
What?
Do they put him in debates?
Unlikely, but I mean, he could.
people would start reconsidering the notion of debates, I think. But
Yeah.
And people forget Dustin Darden is the reason Jason Grenn won in 16 because he got 10% of the vote.
Yeah.
And he's also the reason Jason Grenn lost in 2018 because he was in there again and Sarah.
as a Democrat that time, or
Yeah,
as
he was Independence Party and then he was Democrat. But in both those situations, he created kind of a spoiler effect.
a proven spoiler.
So I don't know. I think the question though for me is, whoever the top four are the Democrats going to come through and rank Murkowski second, where some of them are kind of frustrated with her on certain things on the kind of the present vote with Kavanaugh and some other votes she's taken. because Chewbacca, initially I thought, no chance. But I went to that Trump rally, and there was something going on. It was a huge rally, a lot of people, very excited. And she's got, TV, and she's got some money. There's a bit of a movement there. I think probably the chance isn't big, but I don't think it's a low chance on Chewbacca. It really depends on the Democrats and the progressives coming through to help Murkowski get. What do you think, Joelle?
Well, I think that's completely accurate. And I think the seriousness with which Senator Murkowski is taking this race is indicated by the fact that she's already up on the air. The IEs are already rolling in. I don't think anybody's taking this race for granted. So I think she's working, and I think she sees that Kelly Chewbacca, while not raising as much money, and certainly, as you mentioned offline, she's speaking to a specific group of people. Listening to her radio spot a bunch of times on my way in, she's in the lane, and she's just complaining about the federal government and saying to everybody she's different. I will point out this woman has worked for the federal government for most of her darn life.
She talks about the D.C. swamp. She graduated Harvard, worked in D.C. for almost 20 years as a kind of bureaucrat in these some higher profile positions. But it's so odd to me that she attacks Murkowski for being in D.C. She's been there as long as Murkowski has been there.
Yeah.
Well, and I think in terms of resources and available resources, the Murkowski camp has a significant cash on hand advantage. I think she's at
$6 million.
Over 6 million, and Chewbacca has about 1 million. Also, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republican organization that's the campaign arm has reserved ad space about $7 million. And then there's also the IE. But that stuff matters. But I'll say this: if you go look at Senator Murkowski's record, no one's voting record's perfect, but she does deliver big things on big issues. On infrastructure, she made a big push on infrastructure, and that's hard infrastructure. I say this to the Republican friends of mine. I said, we had an option of having a hard infrastructure bill or having a hard infrastructure and a social infrastructure bill jammed into one, which they could have passed with no Republican support at all. And that's what happened. They separated it, and
Joe Manchin.
And Joe Manchin, and that was in part of Lisa Murkowski's relationship with Joe Manchin. So she's delivered big on energy reform. She just wrote the biggest energy reform legislation in 13 years, the Energy Act of 2020. Big thing, reforming all of our energy policies. The infrastructure bill had a ton of stuff on regulatory reform, critical minerals, on big stuff people care about here, on Alaska gas line, a loan guarantee, energy grid stuff, things that even Governor Dunleavy's leaning on, like some of the renewable energy platforms. These are things that I think when you really look down into the record, that people kind of care about. And you can tell her first big ad was, she talks about the difference in this race is who can deliver most for you. And look, whether you like it or not, it's hard to beat Senator Murkowski's seniority. She's about to be the second longest serving Republican on the Appropriations Committee. She's a subcommittee chair. She's the senior Republican on the Energy Committee, having just fulfilled her chairmanship. She's in this great position to do a lot of good for Alaska. And I think in the era of, a lot of people still remember Ted Stevens, Don Young, and the newness of our state, the infancy of our state, and the fact that we haven't had 100 years of statehood to build roads, to build infrastructure. We're still a young state that hasn't benefited from all these years.
And I agree with all of that.
Yeah.
But at this Trump rally, it was. Did you watch it or did you?
No, Jeff, I didn't.
Well, I was there, and it was one of the strangest things I thought was Trump really went after Dan Sullivan, because he's basically endorsed Murkowski and he's standing by Murkowski. And I want to maybe ask you, observe this. The Republicans, this party's been so about Trump now, and now Trump attacks Dan Sullivan, who's been very loyal to him for the whole time he was president and afterwards. And I just wonder what's happening in the Republican Party with Murkowski, and will these Democrats and progressives come to aid her just like they did in 2010 with the write-in with Joe Miller?
Well, I think there will be people who will rank her second. I presume it will be enough that from the progressive side. I think there are obviously deep concerns about important issues like Roe versus Wade, gay marriage, things that are topical rightly so, and that there are rights that need to be protected for American citizens that just lost them or that will lose them very soon. And I'm going to take her at her word that she's going to do something about that. And that's where I have come to. If the Supreme Court says you must litigate this stuff, then we better see some damn litigation. So we got to litigate. Legislate. We got to get legislation on the books, and we got to pass it. We know where the American public is on this issue. And she has said over and over on the record where she is on these issues. Okay, great. Let's get it done. Let's pass some bills. And let's get it codified in law so people are protected. She hasn't said she won't do that. She hasn't said that at all. It's, as it often is with big, complicated issues, it's, and every time I've had a conversation with Senator Murkowski about anything, it's always like, well, when I read it, I'll let you know what I think about it. She does not, the kind of person who gives you carte blanche approval about anything. Yeah. She's very, very detail-oriented. So, Joe Manchin and Lisa Murkowski are currently, and maybe in the future, depending on how this all shakes out nationally, I mean, I've said it to many people, I mean, those two run the Senate. Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer are trying really hard, but Lisa Murkowski and Joe Manchin run the Senate. And I don't think that changes in the next 6 years. I
just saw earlier, there's I didn't read the whole thing, but some kind of climate agreement, and this is a Joe Manchin basically agreeing with, working with Schumer.
Right.
It wouldn't have happened without him.
Right. So those two are in a position where they are, it disappoints some that this is like legislating towards the middle, but I think in the end, that's what's happening. They both are kind of driving their parties towards the middle a little tiny bit, and they're the ones calling the shots, and we would be stupid to ignore that.
I was going to say, in this, a lot of outsiders ask me, they're like, how do you even get your head around this race? I've talked to a lot of the rating agencies, just who I've worked with in 2020, who I still have good contacts with. I kind of point back to her 2016 race isn't that marginally different. Remember, it's four candidates. It's Ray Metcalf, Margaret Stock, Lisa Murkowski, and then Joe Miller jumps in to make the four candidates, a top four, if you will. And they had Joe Miller, Lisa, Margaret Stock, and Margaret was the independent middle, and then Ray Metcalf was the Democrat nominee, which was this interesting race. Now, Lisa still, she performs fairly well. Metcalf and Margaret Stock collectively get like 25% of the vote. Lisa gets like 44.9% of the vote, and Joe Miller got like 90,000 votes. Lisa got like 140,000 votes. So if you look at 2016, it's something to go look back at where did those margins change? Where did the dials turn? And when you look at it, you go, okay, if Lisa remember in 16, Lisa was the Republican Party nominee. Maybe that dial changes a little bit more here. Maybe it squeezes along this way. But that's what campaigns are doing. That's where they're having to look at where is this debate happening.
Well, I would say in that situation, the bulk of Ray's and Ray didn't get that many, but Margaret Stock's votes would have gone to Lisa. So
yeah, I mean
she already had 40. You said 45, I think, and it was already. But I think it's a lot different now, 2022 than 2016.
But I'll say this too: there's a lot of campaign left to be had. I think that Kelly has been in this race for a year and a half. She's been in a long race. Lisa has had it seems that she's had kind of an apparatus, but they're just now kind of. I feels like they're turning things full bore, where they're up on TV, and Kelly in the same way. They're finally up. They're finally out, and offices are open, signs are placed. But then it becomes the flood of airwaves, your mailers, your door knockers, your phone calls. That stuff, your text messaging. A lot of that stuff has not happened yet.
Well, I think once October comes around, there's going to be a lot of ads and attacks against Chewbacca for some of her, when she was younger, some of the views that came out, the gay conversion, and there's some really kind of extreme social views she's had, and that really hasn't come out too much. I mean, it was covered when she was made commissioner by Dunleavy back in 2019, but I think this is going to become a big attack on some of her prior views, social views is going to come off. And even one more thing I'll say, they came out recently and said that she's against birth control by mail, and then she comes out, no, it's just the abortion, it's just the morning after pill. But then there's a video they found of her saying, no, all contraception. So I think when this stuff starts coming out, it's going to be really not good for her.
Yeah, I hadn't seen that. I will just say that this is maybe feeling a little bit more partisan, but
You partisan? Matt.
No, but I will say what's happening, I think Alaskans are asking themselves, when it comes to the Biden administration and some of the things that are happening, I mean, there is going to be a conversation about that side of the politics and the implications on energy, on access to lands, on some of these things that are really, Dan Sullivan's talking a lot about it, and I think even Senator Murkowski talks about this stuff too, but I think those are some of the issues that the Kelly Tshibaka campaign are going to focus in on, which is the Biden effect on Alaska. I think the governor's going to focus in on it. In many cases, Republicans right now, if they can pick one common enemy, it's Joe Biden and it's energy policies and things like that.
Well, the governor's, he's having to kind of thread a needle too. He didn't go to the Trump rally because, Trump endorsed him conditionally that he didn't endorse Murkowski, and I think he's trying to avoid getting in the middle of that.
I think he's trying to avoid most public appearances in general.
Well, that's what he did in 2018. I mean, he didn't go to a lot of debates, and we've already seen he's not going to answer some of these questionnaires. But the Murkowski, that's really interesting because if Trump were to go, do to him what he did to Dan Sullivan, that would be really bad for Dunleavy.
I don't know. I mean,
Trump won Alaska, pretty overwhelmingly.
Right. So what percentage of the Trump base, how big, what percentage of Alaska is actually Trump base? And then what percentage of those people are already not voting for Pierce and Kirka? And so what is Dunleavy actually getting out of that? Because I do still believe it's a relatively small, probably in the 30% range, that are like hardcore Trump base. My guess is Dunleavy's only picking up 10% of those people every day anyway, because they're going to choose some other path. I mean, that's my feeling. So,
but I just think he's trying to definitely avoid getting involved in the Murkowski situation, right? I mean, he doesn't want to.
Yeah, well, I just say I think
he's also not endorsed Chewbacca, who's he picked to be his administration commissioner. So you'd think he would.
I mean, I will say, like, having been on the receiving end of endorsement asks, there are some people in general who are like, when it's your turn to be up for election, they're like, I focus on my race. That's what I'm focusing on. You can focus on your race. I'll focus on mine. And that policy in a vacuum is not a terrible policy. It kind of makes sense. Like, hey, I'm going to focus on getting myself reelected. You focus on you. But I think there is an expectation that you do speak up and stand up. But I will say it does get complicated when you endorse other candidates. They say something that isn't in line exactly with you say. Mm-hmm. So sometimes it is easier just to say, I'm going to stick with my race and you focus on yours. So again, I can't speak to, I don't know why, where they are on endorsements or anything like that. But
it just kind of gets awkward because, like I said, he appointed Chewbacca as commissioner, but then he had this renewable energy conference, and Murkowski's been very helpful on some of this stuff with the infrastructure. So you're kind of stuck in a situation where you don't want to say anything, but then people are saying, hey, I did this for you, I did this for you, help me out, and then it becomes a little awkward.
Yeah, I mean, well, so maybe he stays out, but again, there's a lot of election to be had, and I'm not, who knows what happens in the next 2 or 3 months. But again, I think that this idea that focus on your own race. I mean, look, to the governor, he has his own campaign to focus on. Then he has a state to focus on. There's a lot of work happening, so I can see a little bit staying out. But
let's move on to the House race. We'll start with the special general, and then we'll talk about the House primary. But Al Gross withdrew, and there was this date situation where the election dates weren't lined up with the withdrawal deadline, which was, I think, a huge kind of screw up by the state. But anyways, here we are, and they didn't move up the fifth place person, which would have been Tara Sweeney. Mm-hmm. So we have Nick Begich, Sarah Palin, Mary Peltola, 2 Republicans, and a Democrat. My view of this, and I'll start with you, Joelle, I think Peltola is going to get the most votes on the first round, somewhere around 40%. And then Nick and Sarah are going to get the other portion of the 60%, and then one of them is going to go over. And the question is, who's that going to be? I mean, what do you agree with that?
No,
No?
actually,
Oh,
no, I don't. I presume that, I guess in my mind, the math works that Nick and Sarah will be 1-2.
On the first round,
Right. Well,
I think Barry will probably get
Here's what
all the Democrats and progressives, all the left of center vote.
Here's kind of how I've lined it out. Similar to what you're saying, it's, I've looked at, I did Don Young's races and Senator Sullivan's races. It has always seemed that a Democrat or the left progressive candidate, Forrest Dunbar got 41% against Don Young in 2016. Al Gross got 41 point something percent against Senator Sullivan in 2020. Elise Galvin is right around 40%. Steve Lindbeck, when he ran for Congress, got 36%. And it's always kind of been this joke that a Democrat, without doing anything, can get 32, 33% of the vote in the federal races. So I've kind of said it is fair to say that a Mary Peltola can get anywhere between 36 to 40% of the vote, which would automatically mean that Sarah and Nick are going to be fighting for about 60 to 66% of the vote. And so I think Mary Peltola is going to come in second. I think that Nick and Sarah are going to come in.
But on the first round, I think she'll come in first.
Yeah. Well, so there's a likelihood that, so I'll say this, there's no way I don't think Mary Peltola is going to come in third. I just don't see it happening. That a Democrat or the left-leaning candidate can, with certainty, get over 33.3% of the votes, which would mean Sarah Palin and Nick would be fighting for the other 66.6%.
Well, I mean, if Mary gets 40 and Nick gets 35, or Palin gets 35, and then the other person gets the rest, whoever the third place finisher is, whether it's Palin or Begich, those votes are all going to go to the Republic. Palin and Begich are going to share votes. So if whoever finishes second place in the first round is probably going to win the race. So if Palin finishes second, Begich's votes will put her over.
well, those two could be, if you take your guys' math, those two point differential could be tiny.
Yeah, I think there's a potential.
Could be very
it
close,
could be very tiny.
And I think there's no. I think there's a lot of people who are trying to think strategically about this race, about who they're picking on for their second place. Depends on what you think the fate of our state would be on and either one. But I guess my thought is they'll be neck and neck, and we will be down to those 2 week later mailed-in ballots trying to figure out who's the first place winner in this one.
My understanding for the ranked choice, and we'll see this on August 16th, is they're going to show the first round results with all the ballots they've received early absentee on election day, and then they aren't going to retabulate until they get all the other ballots in, which could be 2 or 3 weeks for all the absentees. So if that's the case, we're gonna see 3 results, and we're only going to see the preliminary first round results, and we're not going to see the final results until all the ballots come in, because they don't want to start tabulating when there's more ballots out. So I think that's going to create a lot of confusion and frustration from people who, especially if Peltola's got, let's say if she gets 42%, and then 3 weeks later she's in second place. Well, people are going to have a hard time, I think, grasping that or understanding that.
Sure. Well, and the question I ask is, like, what is the strategy right now? Like, if you were to place the candidates on a spectrum, it is, correct me if you disagree, but it's Mary Peltola to the left. Nick has to be to the center of Sarah Palin, right? I mean, or is it?
I think he's trying to do that, but he previously positioned himself.
Yeah, he
right
did.
Of Don Young.
He kind of did that. So in terms of strategy, where do these candidates go? Is the Begich campaign kind of trying to attract now to the middle and redirect, or is this debate are Sarah and Nick kind of fighting for voters in like the 70th percentile of Republicans? So if there's
I mean, Palin got what, 26, 27%?
27%.
And then Begich got like 19%. So we already kind of see, and I think these voters in the primary, August primary, are going to be a pretty similar group for this June 11th race. I mean, these are kind of very motivated people who want to vote in a primary situation. In that case, a special election, it was 150,000 voters.
Well, the difference was that was a vote by mail election, and this one won't be.
That's true, yeah. So now we have.
So that will have a huge impact on turnout. Like, people actually don't know they're not getting a ballot in the mail.
I think it's going to be a low turnout. Yeah. I think it's going to be, it was 27.5% turnout for this special election primary. I think it's going to remain low, and I think that's why we may see some surprises amongst all the races we just talked about. There may be, I mean, there could be a possibility where Lisa Murkowski comes in, doesn't get the most votes in her race because it's a turnout game. We know in the general election there will be about 53% turnout, but there's a possibility we only have 28% turnout in a primary, which is not, that those are motivated voters. Those are what we call 3 and 4 voters.
Which creates a bit of a momentum problem. If Murkowski or Dunleavy or somebody gets second, or somebody in the U.S. House race, one of the kind of front runners gets second, that's for 2.5 months, people can portray you as the second place finisher,
Well, and again, it's just one of these things where there is, turnout is a big factor, and if I was, if I was running a House race, that's what you're focusing on right now, which is turnout, because there's less persuasion. There's so many votes still on the table. I mean, there's 20% of people that we know are willing to vote in a general election, so getting them to turn out is probably a better use of your resources than trying to switch people's votes. It's driving turnout amongst people that you think are in your camp.
Well, this will give us a little preview of this ranked choice situation. And
I think your observation that this will be confusing to people. I think it will be initially confusing to people, and at the same time, this will also be the election where everybody kind of like comes to grips with what it is. So by the time we get to November, it'll be a little bit more calmed down because they'll actually know it's a preview, right? They'll know what this movie's going to have in it, and I think we're going to see first places. And if the division holds to its current way of doing business, every day as more ballots come in, they will update first place positions.
Right, I think so. I think that's
So
right.
it won't be until you see the final tally of first place that the recalculation begins, but you'll know how many ballots have been cast. And so the prognosticators, the Will Muldoons, the Jeff Landfields, they'll just start doing the math in the back of their head about what we think, the electorate is. You can, see kind of like who voted, what was the composition of this electorate, because the composition of the electorate does kind of help determine what we think, how people are going to cast that second ballot. But I agree with Matt completely. This is a turnout game. And I would be actually, I think, a little surprised. I'm thinking that with ranked choice voting, I'm hoping there'll be a little bit more interest in some people turning out that maybe haven't. And so we might see a higher turnout in the general. But I think the primary is going to catch up with people. They almost never know it's there. It's always been a closed primary. They don't really understand that it's one vote, one ballot.
It's a good point too. This isn't vote by mail like
Right.
the last one where everybody got a ballot. So
Right.
That's true.
It's a source of confusion right now on the doors that people just don't. They think the ballot. If you live in Anchorage in particular, you've come now to believe ballots just come in the mail, and so it may be not so much an issue in Fairbanks or in Juneau, but I think here it's not an insignificant problem.
Well, so we have the special primary, but on the same ballot we have the regular primary for the Scott or Trent. If you can put up the primary for the U.S. House. So this is 22 people. It's less than half of the special with 48. I think it's going to be a similar situation where Palin, Begich, Peltola, and Sweeney.
Right.
And then the general is going to be the top 4, and you're going to have Sweeney on there. Because actually, they've all raised money. So it's unlike the U.S. Senate race where Chesbrough didn't raise very much and nobody else raised hardly anything. This is one where they're all kind of raising money.
Yeah.
But there is still a lot of other people on there to get if they get 0.5% or percent, that could have a little bit of an impact. But I think it's very likely it's going to be the Palin, Begich, Peltola, Sweeney. So you're going to have that's going to be a situation with 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. So what does that do, Matt?
I don't.
He's like
I don't know if it changes.
contemplating.
I don't know if it changes that much. I'm not. I think that Mary Peltola will continue to in those top 4 of a Sweeney, Peltola, Begich, and Palin. Well, the person who gets elected, that new incumbent, they will potentially get a lot of resources. That potentially, fellow congressmen or the
Huge advantage,
the
right?
NRC.
Or it's a horror befalling our state, and it's an
Who you
advantage.
who you talking about?
I don't know who I could be talking about.
I like her. I like Sarah Palin.
But if there is somebody who gets elected that people are like, well, no way.
Well,
it could motivate lots
it's
of other
double-edged sword.
behaviors.
If you get
It's a
elected
double-edged sword.
and you do great,
Right.
people, okay, but if you go
Yeah.
off the rails, then
Right.
people are going to have
So,
concerns.
and to Joelle's point, which is there is this motivation factor. I think, look, if Sarah Palin gets elected, I think that a group of the House Republicans will probably come together that will help her. I think she's gonna go in. It's only they're going to go down there by the time they get certified. It's the beginning of September. They go down there for 2 weeks. They move in. There's a couple earned media stories. They go take their first vote. They get sworn in. They get their committee assignments. They get a bunch of good earned media.
They come back.
And then they come back. And to be honest, every single one of those stories should be a good earned media story. So they come back, and then they get to go and start running their election, hopefully with more resources. To your point, though, there could be a groundswell of folks that say we need to change this up. Something needs to happen. Interestingly, in a debate that I moderated for the Anchorage Republican women, the question was asked: would they support the winner of the special election? And Sarah Palin did not participate, but it was Coghill, Reback, Sweeney, and Begich, and they, to my recollection, I think they all said that they would. I mean, who knows what happens? To this question, does everyone stay in? Does everyone get out? Who knows? If Sarah Palin advances, which I think Sarah's in the driver's seat of that special election, just based on the vote totals, how well she performed, which surprised me too, I think that she's going to be in the driver's seat, and that comes with resources.
The other thing, whoever ends up winning the special, this happened to Don Young when he won a special election. They get a little bit of a seniority bump over every other newcomer this year, which is good for Alaska, because if you have 50 new members or whatever, that's a significant advantage with being there before everybody else.
I was saying this the other day. I feel bad because Don Young has had the largest office in Congress for about 12 years, and before that, it was one of the top 10 largest offices. He had that for another 12 years. Our new member of Congress will have Don Young's office for about 3 weeks. Then they'll pack him up, send him to a basement, and some other senior member will get that office. But the office that Alaska will have for the next 10 or 12 years is going to be a shoebox. I mean,
you've been. I'm sure you've been to Don's office.
I've been to Don's office. Yeah.
Think of the animals and the
yeah.
gestures.
Yeah.
Because you go to the other offices, and like you said, you walk down the hall, and you're like, there's like 3 people and something smaller than this.
It's going to be like an Alaska legislative office where there's like 4 sweaty people all in one little tiny room.
In some cases, they're smaller than legislative offices.
But then you go to the Senate offices, and those are all pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's the next level.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And look, I think Alaskans are, we'll be excited to see what happens. I think we're all kind of waiting and watching. We can only guess as much, but I do think whoever does win that special is a little bit more in the driver's seat. They get a few advantages, but there may be some disadvantages to that, as you note there.
I mean, I think sometimes who your friends are, you got to be really careful about who you decide to make friends with on your first 3 days of school if you're this new congressperson, because, who you decide to befriend and stand next to and get pictures taken with in those dangerous 3 weeks, no matter who wins.
Yeah.
Well,
that could be the worst thing that happened to you or the best thing that happened to you.
And with that said, I will say, remember in 2020, there was a moment where Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, and there was this big fundraising campaign. It was named Get Mitch or Die Trying. And they did something through Act Blue, which they split it between 15 candidates. And that's when Al Gross was the recipient of about $15 million overnight. And Elise Galvin actually did very well in that House race. She raised a few $1,000,000 at the same time. So there is a possibility that, if there's a polarizing person, if something like this, it gets on the radar, there's possibility for money to get added to this race.
I agree with Joelle. I mean, if Palin wins and goes down there and takes a picture with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, that is not going to be and I don't think she would. You'd think she would have enough sense not to do that. I mean, but she might.
Okay.
You don't agree?
Well, what do they say about the stock market? Past behavior is not indication of future
Past
returns.
past returns aren't indicative
Indication
of
of-
future
I
returns.
will
Yeah.
say, again, I don't think, I looked at the Facebook ad library. I've seen kind of some of the expenditures. I'm not hearing a lot from that camp right now, but it's almost like it's by design.
The Palin camp?
Yeah, the Palin camp. It's
Actually been a very minimal campaign. I think she
has some digital, she's doing some mail, but to be honest, like if you look at a lot of the expenditures are spent on fundraising. That's kind of the new critique of big digital fundraising, which is 85% of your money spent on raising 15%, and it's all smoke and mirrors. You can say you raised $1 million. Sarah Palin has $60,000 cash on hand and has raised almost $900,000. You look at that and you're like, where's your money gone? Well,
Right.
it's kind of gone to list rentals and it's gone to fundraising, and that's not an effective outreach. But with that said, people know Sarah. She got 27% in a primary. She hasn't stepped in it. I think.
my view is, and I agree, there's definitely the possibility of going off the rails and doing something crazy. But if she does win, she will go into Congress being one of the most known, famous people in Congress, which, if used correctly, could benefit Alaska. If used correctly.
I had someone
People are going to want to help her. People are going to want to
I had someone
be on
say-
her good side. Right?
They said Sarah Palin has the potential to be the Republicans' AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where you can AOC from New York has the ear of Chuck Schumer. She's kind of like, if you don't do this, I'm going to run against you in a few years. She just qualified age requirement wise to run for Senate, and she has the following and the kind of the rhetoric that builds kind of a following, and she can say, I'm going to push you on some of these policies that I want. And someone just said, if Sarah Palin does it correctly, she can go down there and she can have the ear of the Republican leadership and the chairmans of the committees to say, and if she says oil and gas, natural gas pipeline, jobs in the economy, mining, critical minerals, Tongass, and she keeps it resources oriented. If she keeps it topical on jobs, the economy, there's people who think she can do a good job.
And the potential issue is, if the Republicans take back the House and the Senate, which I think is likely, Biden's still the president, and Murkowski, she has a relationship with the Biden administration. Palin was on the podcast last week, and she basically was not interested in working with the Biden administration, it sounds like. But if we get into that situation where it's a divided, Congress and president, that could be another 2 years of just really, almost worse than we're seeing now, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. It's deja vu all over again, right?
And we've got this gas pipeline. They're talking more about the price of gas is up. There's been a lot more conversation about that. But that's going to be, for that to happen, it's going to require a lot of people coming together who maybe don't even normally want to talk to each other.
And one of the things that you can do when you get a new Congress and a new Congress and an opposition president, there's this thing called the Congressional Review Act, where you can go in and review rules and regulations that are only so old, and you can reverse those with a simple majority vote. And that's one of the most effective tools of new Congresses coming in and challenging a sitting president. We've seen it before, and that's where having a strong person in the House that can do Alaska's bidding. The last time this happened, Alaska had 2 CRAs passed, and so it's important. We'll see what happens. I think that with a change in Congress, with Republicans in majority, it's going to be important who we send down there. We want someone who can have a strong voice on committees, fight hard for Alaska, and kind of be able to be friends too. You need friends across the aisle to get stuff done, because a lot of people down there don't like the special nature of Alaska. We are treated very special. We get a special highway formula. We ask for equity on ferries, and we have a big Alaska Native population. We have all these things that no one else has in the country, and so for the longest time, they don't really like it, but a lot of them are like, I don't want to deal with Don Young. He's going to be an ass if I challenge him. And so people just kind of said, whatever.
Ted Stevens before.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guys, it's been a great discussion. I kind of want to wrap up, Joel. We have this new voting system. We've seen a little preview of it with a special primary. What are your... You didn't support ballot measure 2, did you?
No.
I voted against it as well, just
Yeah.
because of the potential confusion element. But what are your thoughts about this primary and then going forward this general with this new system? To me, I talked to a lot of people who still don't seem to grasp it.
I think there's going to be a lot of education around. I mean, I don't know, maybe just because I see it on Twitter, and Twitter is full of people trying to explain things to people. But there's a lot of explanations going on in Twitter. I think we will see a lot of advertising. I think the ballot itself is relatively self-explanatory. I think the level of patience you will take to get the first one, that will be initially a shock. But in the end, I don't think the words ranked choice voting are super misleading. So when you have a ballot initiative pass, it passed and people did vote for it, and I think they knew what they were asking for. So they knew what they were asking for. The question is, so it might be a little ugly to get to the main result because of some other laws, all of which could be changed, by the way. I don't think they will.
You can change ballot initiative in 2 years. So if this does go not well, we could see the legislature. There'll be an attempt, regardless of some people, to try to repeal this. But will there be enough?
Well, I think it all just depends on how the final numbers in the legislature work out. If this proposal does what it advertised to the Alaska public, which is we're going to kind of elect more moderates, and we're going to stop the party violence on one another, where the most radical from each side gets elected. We're going to try to elect some centrists. I think if that happens in Alaska, people will by and large view that as a good thing.
Well, the other thing is everybody who wins, all 60 or 59, there's 59 races, everybody who goes back to Juneau will be a product of this system.
Correct.
So it might be kind of hard for them to say this system sucks.
Right.
I will say I still again, regardless of the view on the ballot initiative and its efficacy and what happens, remind people it's going to be very strange. We're not going to know who wins our governor's race until about November 25th, and we're going to be swearing in either a Governor Dunleavy or a new governor about 8 or 9 days later.
Which creates if it's not Dunleavy, which creates a big problem, because the governor takes office the first Monday in December. The budget's due on December 15th.
If it's not Dunleavy, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be very interesting. I will say this: I think that there will be a bill pre-filed in January to repeal ballot measure 2.
Oh, there'll definitely be.
Yeah.
But the question is, will there be
the question is
support?
does it get momentum? We see a lot of messaging bills that people talk about and argue about, and they don't even make it into on the floor of chambers where they have majority. So it's like, if you can't make it through committee, come on, so it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I think
I'll just close by saying that I think the former Governor Walker could also step in and do the job within 8 days' notice.
Well, he does have a little advantage.
Yeah, I think he's got a little experience.
Well, and to be fair, that does just mean I think candidates will be beginning to have to start thinking about who they want in their administration, who they want in their cabinet, who's going to field the team. Those decisions will have to be made while the counting is taking place.
Right.
In a previous year, maybe you wouldn't know, or you would wait a little bit, but in this instance, you're going to have your team kind of set.
I think Matt's right about that. There's going to be a lot of pressure on every team within a shot to walk in with the basics for sure. Your attorney general and some of your commissioners ready to go.
OMB.
And you might even see over the course of time, as this thing evolves, because that frame is short, it'll be interesting to see if in out years, who you select as a cabinet member doesn't also become a piece of the campaigning architecture as we get a little closer. Like right now, that's not happening. You don't have either of these guys saying, I'm going to bring, Joe Snuffy to be my commissioner of this. But as this deadline stays so short, it'll be interesting to see if that doesn't happen over the course of the next 10 years, where people are kind of leading out, well, I'm going to bring this person as my commissioner of such and such. It's always been considered kind of gauche to do that ahead of time because it's presumptuous. Now it'll be preparedness. So I think we'll see that in out years.
Yeah. Hey, well, I don't know. It seems like we're getting close.
I just want to bring up one more thing.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't bring up before. Now we have the unlimited donations, which the legislature didn't pass a bill on that, and we saw Dunleavy got, a couple $100,000 from his brother, $100,000 from Bob Penny, somebody else $100,000, some business guy. Walker got $300,000 donations from some hedge fund guy in New York and a few others. Do you think? This is significant income for both those campaigns. A little bit of this on the legislative side, nothing is big, but do you think this is going to have a big impact on the public, or do you think there's going to be a more pressure to put some limits on next session, or are they just going to leave it? Because they almost had it last time, but it kind of died right at the end.
I'd be interested in what Matt has to say about this. I think it will depend on how the legislative outcomes go. Like the governor's races it's just a different thing, right? But some lawmaker has to promulgate this and move it through 3 committees in each body, right? And if the experience of lawmakers is, oh, that wasn't that bad. I thought I did fair, or they all won because they made the most money, then if they won and they didn't get the most money, you're going to have some appetite for trying to level the playing field, right? But this is the hard part. We did this, we implemented campaign finance rule laws. The last set we had was a ballot initiative in 1996 that I worked on. Like, usually the people have to bring this type of thing because, as you point out, it's really hard for electeds to look past. And I'm not even saying this is in any way, I don't want this to appear to be like, I feel like that's being self-serving. This is just one of the rules of the road that you should probably not ask them to self-regulate on. You know, there's just some things they shouldn't be allowed to self-regulate on. This would be one of them in my mind.
You know, I'll say a couple things. One, you know, there are other states who don't have campaign limits for state candidates, which is interesting. You know, I kind of personally, I said to someone, I said, they should just, you know, that bill that was working through the legislature, I thought it was a little low. I was like, they should have just tied it to the federal dollar, which is $2,800 an election, or just mirrored it somewhere similar. Because $1,500 is on the low scale of things. Other states have $10,000 limits. The federal limit is $2,800 an election, or $2,900 per election, so $5,800 total. So that's interesting. I think if there's going to be a fix, they're going to have to raise the cap, and they're going to have to. We should tie it to something else. I will say this. You know, on the governor's race, they both leading candidates have got this money, and you know, I'll say that IEs in this space are generally formed to do people's dirty work, right? Generally, IEs go negative. They do the opposition defiement. That's just how it goes. So there's something to be said that having this money go directly to the candidates, it makes every message they share, every dollar they spend accountable to the candidate. In the past, the IEs got to spend the money, and the candidate could say, I can't coordinate. I have no idea what they're doing. That's not me. And everyone would kind of say, okay, all right. But now all the money is accountable to the candidates. Every message they share has their name on it. So, you know, in some ways, maybe that's...
Well, but the IEs are still there, Matt. I mean,
The
Francis
governor's got
Dunleavy could come
$3
in
million.
and, yeah, I mean, so the IEs are, I mean, you're right. You do see them having more resources to do work, for sure. But the IEs are still there. And there always will be. I mean, that's federal law. So
They're
let's
gonna-
talk about the Constitutional Convention. You're not going to get us away from the table without
I'm like, I'm
talking.
going to get some water. I'm like,
Okay. Smile, you
some
took
water
my
there?
water bottle away.
I got you.
real quick, want to thank our main sponsor for the studio here, GCI. Love GCI. Internet here is blazing fast. We're a real big fan of GCI. So you guys are on the. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I know you guys are both against the Constitutional Convention, but we'll talk about it for a few minutes.
Well, I'll say this. You know, we've been on the other side of like issue. This is the first time one of the first times we're on the right side of the same side of the issue. I laughed on the 2020 election night. You know, we kind of felt Joelle was on the rise to be the next head of AFL-CIO, and I laughed. I was like, there she is over at Al Gross's election night party. But we're standing here as someone who's traditionally been on two sides of a lot of issues, two sides of a lot of politics, and we are working together on this group, Defend Our Constitution, that has organized. It's a big growing coalition of business people, of stakeholders across the country, of sportsmen, of labor leaders, of rank and file men and women who work across Alaska. And we have Republicans, Democrats, and we've said, hey, we disagree on a lot of stuff, but on the issue of a constitutional convention, particularly in 2020, we agree it's not a good idea.
I mean, I totally understand the risks, and I'm very understanding of the uncertainty it will create. But I mean, in my view, things in the state are so screwed up, especially in the legislature.
What do you think's going to get fixed in the? How do you think they would fix what's wrong in the legislature?
My hope would be they reform the legislature and we add more legislators and we pay them more money and make it a full-time job and take away the citizen legislature.
Well,
concept, because
I would
it's not made
concur
up
with
of
you,
regular
but the
citizens.
voters would vote that down because this has to then go to the vote of the people.
I think that would be an easy point to sell. We're like look who we're getting. Look what the results are. Most people who would be good legislators don't want to run because it's 50,000. It's like you got to go to Judah for 6 months.
Yeah.
Deal with people like me. I mean, it's not a great situation.
I would generally say it's not that there aren't any good ideas. Alaskans have amended the Constitution 28 times, and they brought it for.
That many?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they brought stuff forward
Really?
40
That many?
times, and it's passed 28 times. So Alaskans have figured out this process. Let's fix it. Other people have said, why don't we put together a commission? Let's study changes. If that's the route people want to go, that we can do that. But I guess for every good idea, there's a lot of bad ideas. I was talking to some resource development folks, and I said, there's a million Stand for Salmons, there's a million Bristol Bay Forevers, there's a million efforts to lock up the Ambler Road or other resource development projects. And a big thing for me in looking at this, there can and will be a big chilling effect on the economy, on the new investment climate.
That's true. And I mean, the other thing that's interesting is the people who are aligned allies for the convention would not be allies after it passed. They all have different reasons for wanting it.
Right.
Judges, abortion, resource, whatever it might be, privacy. But then if it does pass, all those allies become enemies essentially.
Well,
on a lot of, and
you
that's
bring up
where-
a really good point. We were just talking about IEs. I want to be really clear. Candidates will be running to be delegates like a candidate runs. Independent expenditures will be allowed. You will see a trough of out-of-state money rolling into our state to try to better the position of whomever and to influence the outcome of that election. And so I mean, if you feel overwhelmed and besieged by electoral politics today, well, now we're talking about your rights. Now we're talking about, and think about all of the people who could come to Alaska and try to influence that who don't live here.
So far, the statewide candidates for governor, Senate, House, a few of the legislative candidates like Mike Shower have gotten behind it, but we haven't seen any statewide candidates get behind it for yes or no. Do you think this is going to become an issue for the November election, this constitutional convention question?
Well, I think it should become a question. Absolutely. I mean, to me, this is, you have to raise your hand to defend something. Do you believe that something needs to be fixed or not? Or do you believe we should be opening this? Do you want to be the governor or the senator for the 3 years where we are in limbo? Like, we have a law, sure, but we don't know what's going to last. How do you make law? How do you build an economy? How do you do any of the work a governor's supposed to do or a senator is supposed to do when you don't know what the basic rules of the road are?
Yeah. Well, and I would say this, we looked at other states who have had constitutional conventions.
Hawaii did.
Yeah, and Hawaii was the last one to do it. It's about 35 years ago. But it's this idea, having run a big campaign and seeing how much outside money and folks involved that come in and push it around and move it around. It's safe to say that the first time any state in the country is doing a constitutional convention in 35 years, outside groups are going to come in and see, they're going to test the waters, play ball, and see what they can do to move around the edges. It'd be a very odd process. We don't know exactly what it would look like, but it would include an election of delegates. It would potentially be a 4 or 6 year process. And again, if you're a ConocoPhillips looking to make a big new investment on the North Slope, if you're a Pitka looking at Pitka as a big operation or development project, it does have a big impact if you're trying to bring $500 million of investment to Alaska. There are countless issues, and I will say it does also pit people against each other regionally. So, if Southeast obviously has their issues. But if you're the Mat-Su Valley, you care about certain things that other people don't care about. And if you're the same thing, the Kenai Peninsula, or if you're the North Slope, there are these regional things where you could get teamed up against to say, regionally, Mat-Su, we're going to change your borough status, so you have to start paying for policing.
We should do that.
Well, that's
great. I'd be all for that.
But then you say,
as the state, people watching, the state subsidizes a huge amount of.
Well,
Mat-Su.
that's not my point today. My point is
great
that
thing.
every
area,
area has, every constituency and stakeholder has something that they care about that they don't want to be changed, and that's a big point. Look, you can find issues in areas that you would like to be reformed. There's a big member of our coalition, John Coghill, who he is absolutely pro-life. He's raised issues with.
But you can't reform the legislature because they won't ever reform themselves. This is again my sole reason for thinking it might not be the worst idea, because maybe you can reform how the legislature is comprised and
well,
and
you could do it
structured.
through a constitutional amendment. In fact, there was a constitutional amendment. It was a number of years ago now. Remember, Reggie Joelle brought forward an amendment to increase the number of people in the legislature. We voted on this like 8 to 10 years ago. And the problem was it got out of the legislature and it got put to the people, but then we weren't able, there just wasn't enough energy. Yeah. It might have been 2010.
And we have the same number of
12.
legislators we did in 1959, which is 60, and the population has tripled. I mean, I spent a lot of time down there the last 4 years, 5 years, and it doesn't work very well. It works actually pretty bad, and especially the dividend situation, and that's another thing. Maybe that could get somehow fixed, because I don't see that getting fixed anytime soon. I mean, the governor's for a full dividend and a payback, and then a full dividend, and everybody's on 50-50, and then now the price of oil goes up, and now it's 5,500 instead of 2,600, and it just like waves and wanes every time, and it's nothing else can really ever happen. I mean, we don't build anything anymore. We don't
well, and I'll say this,
or bridges or.
There's also no guarantee, Jeff. Like again, there's issues that I could personally say, okay, that makes sense, but there's no guarantee that it gets done. Some of these issues, like the PFD, they haven't had the votes in the legislature over 50 for really any change. They could have changed the statute to look very something specific, but they've kind of said no. So there's no necessarily guarantee that the change can even be done in a constitutional convention. But we don't know. A lot of people say we can base it off of what things look like. They worked on some guiding language in the 70s, but no one knows exactly what it would look like. The legislature most likely would set the parameters of what the election would look like, how delegates were elected, how many there are, where they would convene. There's also, the funny part is a convention is 60 to 90 days, is my understanding. But I joked with someone, I was like, oh, it's hard to get something done in 90 days ever.
No, I mean, it would be, I agree, it would be very messy, and I'm leaning towards the no side. But I just think, also it'd be great for my business. I mean, that'd be a lot of coverage there.
Well, that's a good way to think about it, Jeff, absolutely.
a lot of things to report on.
Well, I think we would probably agree in saying that while everybody has an issue, they either want to defend or change. It's important to remember that this opens up the entire Constitution for rewriting whole cloth, not amending, it's a rewrite. And so it becomes a Pandora's box of who knows what's going to come out the other end. You go through this entire process, and then the voters have to vote on it. So you go through this 6-year process.
It's an up or down vote.
And it's an up or down vote. So then you've wasted all this time, you've stayed in limbo, you've fought like dogs, then they vote it all down and you're back to the original.
So if they say no, that's it. All bets are off. We
go right back to the way it was. So you could have a long, contorted exercise that pits people against one another.
But on the other side, wouldn't that factor make it to where they don't pass some kind of off the rails document? Because if it's nuts, people aren't going to vote for it. So it's got to be at least palatable.
If you look at the language for Constitutional Convention, it basically says every 10 years there will be a vote, and then the lieutenant governor kind of executes if the legislature doesn't act. So the legislature will likely be the ones that build the legislation, pass it through the legislature of what it's done, how your delegates are elected. Generally speaking, they're going to be very closely attached to what our legislative districts look like now. And then they can specifically look at, if you bundle things together or not. So there is a lot of uncertainty of exactly what this looks like. There is a possibility that there could be multiple votes, but we just don't know at this time. And
I think the Constitution says it'll be at the next regular election unless they choose a special election. So
that's right.
So it could be 2 years.
To elect the delegates.
People even get elected to be a delegate.
Mm-hmm.
And the timeline gets funky too, because there will inevitably be legislators that want to serve as the delegate. There were a number of delegates. There were a number of state legislators who served as delegates to the 1955 convention. I think it was like 9. 13 ran, 9 were elected. So they will inevitably serve. So that means, in terms of having a special election, you're not going to do it during legislative session. They're going to want opportunities to run. then you're going to have enough time to have an election. So we will see. A special election can be costly. So we will be.
Would you run to be a delegate if it goes? I'm a yes.
Well, see, I knew we'd get to it eventually. See, Jeff just wants to run for the Constitutional Convention. He has to have a platform.
If it passes, I absolutely want to run for that. I will run for that. You?
Ladies and gentlemen, that's another reason to vote no.
Wow, you guys are going to use this as an ad. Think about it. Jeff Landfield is the secretary for the convention.
But look, I think there's some people saying look, this is just giving an opportunity for people. This is about people are saying that you don't trust people. That's not what I'm saying at all. Frankly, I think that there are a lot of outside groups that, because we are a small state, because when it comes to the cost of doing business and running campaigns here, that we can get flooded and we can have someone come in and with an outside influence and kind of trying to shape and change your narrative. So
it becomes a pretty cheap kind of incubator for people who want to, whether it's pro-life or pro-choice or gun or whatever, resource. Overall I do agree it's very risky, and it's probably would create a huge amount of uncertainty and problems.
Yeah.
But it's always gotten about 35%. One time it got almost 40%. So it's this dividend issue, and a lot of people don't like the judicial system, and will it pass? I think it's going to be. If it doesn't pass, it's going to be, I think, closer than it's ever been.
Well, we are working really hard to make sure that it does not pass.
Is there any polling? Have you guys looked at this or?
Well, we should have polling soon, but we don't have it right now.
Share that with me. I'll put it out there.
We'll see.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, and this is the start of there's a lot of passion on this issue. This is going to be a civil discourse. There's going to be conversations and debates about what this looks like. A lot of Alaskans, in making this decision to decide where I was on this, there's a lot of strong conservative Republican Alaskans throughout our history who have come to the same conclusion that I have, which is that there's a lot of things built into our Constitution and the legal precedent that's built on top of it for resource development, for the way that industry does business. There's a lot of things for management of fish and game. I mean, I talk about this all the time. Like in Congress, we had to fight for our constitutional right to manage for sustainable yield. And what that allows for hunter and fishermen, that allows you to do predator control. So you can make sure you have large moose populations. This is why, on the conservative side of things, this is why a lot of people have reached this conclusion. That's why there's hunters and trappers and organizations who have supported it. That's why chambers of commerce like the Fairbanks Chamber, the Juneau Chamber, the Ketchikan Chamber have come out against it. There's a growing group, and it's important. I feel pretty confident when people look into it and they think about the consequences versus the opportunity. There's a lot more consequences.
Well, it's definitely going to be I think an issue. And it's going to be on the November ballot, not the August ballot.
Yeah. Correct, in the November ballot. Yep, and I think that it, in the context of the times we live in, and the dysfunction is, for you, it's an incentive to get in there and do something. For other people, it's an incentive to not get in there and do something. And I think I'm on the latter one of that.
Well, I will say about a year ago, Bill Maher had Adam Schiff on his show, and Bill Maher mentioned his Constitution's really old and it's got to be updated, and he kind of said we should redo it, and Adam Schiff said that is the worst idea possible in this political climate to open this kind of thing up, and it would create a lot of huge fights, and it could be very messy. So I think there is a lot of concerns with it, and we'll see. It's going to be a big issue. I think for a lot of legislative races, it's going to come up, and the governor's race is probably going to come up. So
I think it should. I think it's an important question.
Well, I want to thank you guys for coming here. Matt Shuckerow from Fathom Strategic Communications and Joelle Hall from the Alaska AFL-CIO. It's been a great discussion.
Jeff. Yeah, appreciate it.
We'll do more of these. I want to thank GCI for being our sponsor here, for making live streams like this possible. And stay tuned. We're going to have a big election central on August 16th. We're going to have a panel. We're going to have candidates in studio and on Zoom. We're going to be doing a lot of coverage for the August 16th primary, which is just over just under 3 weeks away. And early voting and absentee in person starts I think August 1st, so we're getting really close to being able to vote in the August 16th primary. So thanks for tuning in, and stay tuned for more updates and shows from the Alaska Lambent. And again, I want to thank Matt and Joelle for coming in and being here for the live stream.
Deadline to request your absentee ballots August 7th. So if you want to vote at home, get online and request it.
It's actually not a live stream. We're just doing it. It's going to be up later.
All right.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks
Bye.
everyone.